Hi, I'm Dr. Diane Lass. I'm a clinical psychologist and I have a private practice, Hope and Strength Psychological Services, and a nonprofit Center for Hope and Strength, which is for Center for Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Victims. This video is about issues such as trust and vulnerability and how trust and vulnerability affect our perceptions both negatively and positively. If you've watched any of the videos that I've done in the past, I mentioned that my husband passed away instantly of a heart attack. And so when I was thrown out there in the world, in the dating world, which is about 11 years ago, I was having real issues as far as trust and my own issues as far as vulnerability. My situation was that my husband died, but it doesn't really matter whether it is a death or a loss of a job. Maybe you are splitting up in relationships, somebody's cheated on you, whatever the case may be. It oftentimes triggers feelings of abandonment and rejection, and how we trust other people. I know when I was sent out there in the world, the dating world, the first person that I dated, I look back on that and I didn't trust, and I was looking for red flags. And the truth is about sometimes it is, we're looking for red flags. Red flags are good things to look for at times, but when we're making red flags, these neon signs, it's not good. And the thing is we often test other people. If we don't trust ourselves or we don't trust others, then we are fearful and we look to other people and to find things to validate that they can't be trusted. And the reality is if you're testing somebody, they're going to fail the test. So after I started dating him for a while, I remember one time I was walking out on the pier. I'd go out and go for walks out there before they shut it down. Anyway, I was walking out on the pier and I was thinking to myself, it was such a painful experience to start dating again. And I felt like it was almost like I had this hard shell around my heart. And I was trying so hard to be vulnerable and open, and how it was that this shell I could feel it like slowly melting. But then it got to a point where it's almost like somebody has a pick and they hit it, and all these toxins come flooding out. It's like, I gotta get out, I can't do this. So I remember thinking about all that walking on the pier, and then all of a sudden I thought, this really isn't about whether you can trust that person. This is about whether I can trust myself, which was a big epiphany and aha moment, and that I was just fearful of things that had happened to me in my past. So fast forward, after that's done, I had bought my place up in Palm Desert, and after I moved up there, I met somebody who I really cared about. And I remember the next day waking up and sitting at the side of my bed and thinking, how did this happen? And it was almost like this voice talked to me and said, it happened because you deserve it. And the thing was that until that moment, I didn't realize that I didn't feel like I deserved it. I didn't realize that I felt abandoned and rejected by my husband. Alicia, who works with me, I would say to her, who is 100% my right-hand person, and I couldn't do anything without her, but I would say to her, well, if Steve wouldn't have, my husband, if Steve wouldn't have dumped my ass, I wouldn't be having this problem. And she'd say, will you stop that? She said, he did not dump your ass. And I would say, did he say that he was never going to leave me? Yes. Is he here? No. Okay, he dumped my ass. But as much as I said those things in a humorous kind of way, I don't think I realized how much I actually meant that. I really felt that he abandoned and rejected me. And like I said, that was from from my past, him passing away, whether it's childhood events or whatever it is that brings up our rejection and abandonment. We all struggle with trust issues. So then after I started seeing this guy up there in Palm Desert, and I remember one day, well, it was New Year's Eve day, and I was driving up to Palm Desert from San Diego, and I was already irritated because remember, there was a test. I was already irritated because he wasn't saying drive careful, let me know when you're up there, and as much as those comparisons, we don't want to do them, it happens subconsciously a lot of times. And like my husband, he would have told me, let me know when you're here, or drive safe, or whatever the case may be. So I had 2 hours and 15 minutes to drive up to Palm Desert, getting more and more mad. And I got up there, I drive right past his shop. I go up to a Mexican restaurant and I order food. And I sat there and I thought, you know what? I can't do this. I got to get out of this. And I didn't even know why. It was like, and I would talk to myself, oh, why are you doing this? Why do you need to get out of this? I don't know. All I know is that I feel like I'm on this fast moving train and it's going down this dark tunnel. And if I don't jump, I'm going to be in trouble. And so I just have to jump and I'll figure out the reasons why. So I did, and I did a really good job about that. But the problem is that I was just so afraid of being vulnerable and open and scared that somebody was going to abandon me and reject me and hurt me. It was easier for me at that time. It was easier for me to just book it. Looking back, that would have been the right thing to do, because I drove right past his shop, and the fact that he was moving his shop that day. I could have stopped by there and said, this hurt my feelings because I wish you would have said whatever it is that I wanted him to say. But I didn't. And so it was like he couldn't even pass the test because he didn't even know what the test was. And so in both situations, whether it is at the ones that I was walking on the pier or I was driving up to Palm Desert, I was testing someone, and I was looking for validation in order for me to book it because I wasn't comfortable. But the reality is I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust that if somebody hurt me because I had been so devastated. I didn't trust that I was going to be okay. So it's interesting. So as you think about that, so there's going to be a diagram at the end here so that you can look at this, so it makes more sense. But if you take it back to the point where I was saying that I didn't trust myself, and I didn't trust others, and because of that, I couldn't be vulnerable, because when I don't trust myself, or when we don't trust ourselves and trust others, then vulnerability is looked at as a weakness. We put it out there, we're raw, we're giving people the opportunity to hurt our feelings. And so in order to keep that, so to look at vulnerability as a weakness, to bypass that, then we end up with these defenses that we build up. Things that you're not gonna get to me, you didn't do this, so I'm just gonna bail on the situation. We personalize everything. And it's our ego that's operating. So that comes down to our perception, right? And so then the perception is that that people are going to hurt us. It's a negative perception. So it's a negative perception of the world, self, and others. And so that goes back to we don't trust anybody. But then if you think about it from the flip side of that is if I trust myself that no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay, and that means that it's okay to trust other people, then it's going to change my feelings about vulnerability. Then vulnerability is a strength, because vulnerability is a strength. It's easier to hide behind our defenses, but if we open up and we're vulnerable, then we can operate more of a loving space. We're not operating so much on our ego. We're operating on a loving space, which also changes our perception, which is positive, right? So then we think that we can trust other people. Our perception of the world, others, and ourselves are positive, which would decrease our depression or anxiety. And so then it just, the whole cycle keeps going around. So, it's interesting when it seems to me like my clients, it's like they go in waves. It's like everybody seems to be dealing with the same stuff at the same time. Last week I was out of town and we didn't have time to do YouTube. And so when we were talking on Monday about what this one was going to be about, and we talked about trust and vulnerability, I noticed how so many of my clients were dealing with that. I had a client last week and she was talking about how it was that her boyfriend came to her with, he had made some, like a letter and some bullet points, like three or four different bullet points as to things that were bothering him that he felt that they need to work on in the relationship. And so she's telling me about it, and she's telling me about the different ones that he said. And what was interesting is that she was operating from a place where she wasn't trusting herself or trusting others. She wasn't able to open up and be vulnerable in that situation. And so she was feeling, her defenses came up, and she was operating from her ego. So where her perception came down to, I don't even know why we're bothering to have this conversation right now. I mean, there's all these things that you don't like about me, and there's no way that I can switch up all these things. So why don't we just forget it and just end the relationship? I'd rather have you be with somebody who's happy. See, that's because she didn't trust herself or others. But if you flip that same situation into, he came to her, he had these things, and I believe this is true, he had these things that he thought, we need to work on these things. And he said to her, I love you, I don't want to be with anybody else, we just need to work on these things. If she would have heard that and trusted herself, trust him, and she could be vulnerable in that moment, and then she could operate through that loving space, and then her perception is okay, I got you. Thank you for coming and talk to me about this. We're a team, we're gonna make it work. I trust you, I trust me, and things are good. So it's just a difference between whether it is that you're operating from your ego or you're operating from a loving space. So if you think about something that has happened recently that has frustrated you, and if you stop and you think, okay, why was this a frustration for me? Was I being vulnerable? Was I operating from my ego? Was I operating from a loving space? And what was my perception about this? So what you might want to do, typically if it's really frustrating, unless I'm not talking about abusive situations or people being disrespectful, but typically if it is a frustrating situation, for the most part, we're operating from the ego based. So if you come up with something that frustrated you, reflect upon it, and then write maybe a paragraph about what that process was for you in like the ego based on what your perception was and your level of trust and vulnerability. And write another paragraph about if I would have come about this situation from a level of trust, vulnerability, and a loving space, what would my perceptions be? Because after we discussed it, she's like, "You're exactly right. It's just a flip in how you look at all that." Okay, so the first method of change is awareness. So just reflect on those things, see how you feel, journal a little bit about it, write us a note. And the other thing I wanted to mention is I am also going to start doing a series about domestic violence. As I mentioned, my nonprofit is for domestic violence and sexual assault victims, and so we're going to do just little segments about that. I know that I have my nonprofit, but in my private practice, domestic violence happens in 1 to 3 families. It's across the board. So it doesn't matter if it's my nonprofit or it's my private practice. It is true that if you haven't been through domestic violence, I'm sure there's somebody that you know that has. So it's an incredibly important topic. So, but remember to reflect on trust, vulnerability, your ego stances, and your perception of risk. And like I said, we'll have a little diagram at the end, and make a note. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.